you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns, or SlowBurne from Wildfire Gaming. We're gonna get back to the little mini series that I started last week. Really, I started a couple weeks ago, but I didn't end up actually uploading the podcast until last week. Ranking the top 25 most underappreciated video games of all time. Um, yeah, I ended up having a lot to say on this topic, and so I promptly broke up the episode into a two-parter. So last time we worked through we had an honorable mention and then we worked through the 25 through number 13 most underappreciated video games. So we're going to do my top 12 today and finish this one off. So before we get into that, Controlled Burns is a weekly hobby list podcast with a particular focus on lists and topics related to video games, music, TV, and film, as well as other hobbies and aspects of pop culture. If you're interested in writing into the podcast, having your comments or questions read on air, you can at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. So just to start us off, I'll quickly run through the games that we talked about last time. If you want to hear me talk about them in much more detail, you can go back to the previous episode and check that one out. But as a refresher, the honorable mention was Jack and Daxter. And then we had Spider-Man 2 from 2023, Blasphemous, Halo 5, Guardians, Croc, Legend of the Gobos, Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. That's the bottom one, two, three, four, five. Number 20 was Fallout 4. Number 19 was The Sims Bustin' Out. Number 18 was Halo Reach. Number 17 was Kingdom Hearts. Number 16 was Fallout 3. Number 15 was Final Fantasy 16. Number 14 was Star Wars Battlefront. And number 13 was Pokemon Coliseum. So that takes us into where we're going to be for our top 12 for this week's episode. I just want to remind you that there's different ways that I define underappreciated games. It's not just underrated necessarily. Some of these games were highly rated, like Spider-Man 2, for example. But when you kind of look into the greater context of how these games are kind of appreciated today, they end up coming up short. And then there's of course games that did get a lot of sort of vitriol that I thought was kind of unfair, like Halo 5 Guardians would be a really good example of that. Number 12 on this list is more of the former here, because this is a game that was received very well. But then I feel like it had a sequel that came out and really stole a lot of its thunder and sort of blunted the impact of the original. And often I am kind of a proponent of sequels. I think generally game design improves over time and you have improvements, whether in gameplay or presentation or quality of life in sequels. And certainly that was the case. Is like the Halo series is a good example. Like series that generally got better the longer it went with, at least while Bungie had control of the reins. I had Spider-Man 2 on the list earlier. Fallout 4 would be a good example of that. Maybe I don't necessarily like it more than Fallout 3 in New Vegas, but there were definitely a lot of improvements that were made along the way. But it's rare for me to find that an earlier game in the series is like way better than one that came out later. And that is the case for Ori and the Blind Forest by number 12, which I think is significantly better than its sequel, which was I'm having trouble even remembering what I think it was like Will o' the Wisps or something like that. Um, that came out in 2020. And to be clear, I liked that second Ori game well enough. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous aesthetically. I think that the Ori games, and I talked about this when I did I guess it's been quite a few months at this point, but whenever I did my most beautiful video games of all time, or the Ori games, or I believe my number one, and certainly Ori and the Will of the Wisps it looks better, obviously, because it's a technically late stage Xbox, kind of a cross gen game almost. Xbox One to Series X game, whereas Ori and the Blind Forest was a fairly early Xbox One game. So the environment art is superior. But and you could even argue that like the combat, certainly the combat in Will of the Wisps is superior. But I think that was actually kind of one of my big problems with that game was that it put so much of an emphasis on combat. Whereas the original Ori really put very little emphasis on combat. It was a lot more about just the exploration elements and the really intricate and challenging platforming sequences, which was really kind of unique. I know that the the Metroidvania genre is certainly very in vogue, obviously, especially right now with Hollow Knight Silk Song, breaking records and everything, and everybody was really excited about that. I actually haven't gotten around to playing Hollow Knight. I'm sure it's an incredible game, and it's high on my list of games that I want to check out for sure. But Ori and the Will of the Wisps is currently my favorite Metroidvania. I mentioned Blasphemous in the last episode. That one would rank very highly as well. But I really, really love Ori and the Blind Forest. I think its presentation is unbelievable. I think it's the best 2D platforming I've experienced in a game. I love its approach to puzzle solving. I really am impressed by just the atmosphere of the game, the storytelling of the game. I thought was surprisingly strong, um, and particularly with the characterization of the main villain in the game, which I think is her name is Kuro, the giant owl. Just a really awesome antagonist. I would say one of the greatest that I've ever seen in a video game. Very nuanced character, it turns out in the end, and does a really good job of kind of playing with perspective. And through it all, obviously that rock solid gameplay just really elevates the game and pushes it to above any of the Metroidvanias that I've experienced. So I really, really love Ori and the Blind Forest. Whereas Will of the Wisps, I thought they put a little bit too much emphasis on combat. They added these speed run little this sort of race type things in the game that I didn't really care for. I really thought that they rehashed a lot of the story of Ori and the Blind Forest. It almost felt like they were kind of plagiarizing themselves a little bit with the way that they wrote that second villain, and I just thought it was like, significantly less impactful. And then I also think that with some of the mechanics with the platforming, or again, some of the abilities, I guess, that they added in the game, I didn't feel worked as well or as intuitive as they were in Ori and the Blind Forest. That was definitely noticeable going from Blind Forest to Will of the Wisps. Now, the reason it's this high on this list, I think Ori and the Blind Forest is one of the greatest games I've ever played. It's certainly, like I said, my favorite Metroidvania, but very often, and almost like never do I hear anyone say that. It seems like if you ask somebody with, you know, somebody's talking about their best Metroidvania games and they put an Ori game on the list, they almost certainly will put Will of the Wisps on there instead of Blind Forest. And I just strongly disagree with that. So for that reason, I have Ori and the Blind Forest at number 12. Number 11, this is another game that is in a very vaunted series, maybe the most vaunted series of all time, which is The Legend of Zelda. And it was a game that I heard for so long was the worst in the series, or even just that it was a bad game, to the point where I was really almost intimidated going into it whenever I played through the entire series in, well, I guess kind of between 2021 and, or I guess 2021, 2022, 2023, that kind of time frame leading up to the release of Tears of the Kingdom, basically. And that's my number 11 on this list is Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass for the DS. This is a game that actually my brother is really, I guess it was his, it's probably his. I could be wrong. I might have bought my own copy, but it might have been his copy of the game that I actually played when I finally got around to it. It was one of the last Zelda games that I played because I was kind of trying to play them in relative timeline order. And so I went through the beginning of the timeline, everything is just kind of in one line, starting with Skyward Sword, and you go down to Ocarina of Time, and that's where things kind of split. And I actually did there's kind of a retro line there, where you got like your Link to the Past, basically all your 2D games, your Link to the Past, your Link's Awakening, the Oracle of Ages and Seasons, um, and then of course the one of the 3DS, Link Between Worlds. So I actually went down that path first. Part of that was just because I was just really interested in seeing um, what all the fuss was about with Link to the Past because it's so often cited as the greatest video game of all time. I don't know if I'm ever going to do a top 25 most overrated video games, but certainly Link to the Past would be on that list. But I went through that line and then I went through the kind of more 3D line, which goes into Majora's Mask and then Twilight Princess. And then on the other line, it's kind of like the Flood line. So that's where you have the Wind Waker. And then you have, of course, the Phantom Hourglass is a direct sequel to Wind Waker. And then you had Spirit Tracks after that. And so those were those 2DS games. Those were the last games that I played it before I finally went on to Breath of the Wild and kind of had my mind blown by that game, even in 2023. But yeah, Phantom Hourglass, I was really, my expectations were very low, just because I almost never have seen anyone speak highly of this game at all. And so, that does help. I think whenever you go into a game and your expectations are in check, and they certainly were for me for Phantom Hourglass. But wow, I really enjoyed it a lot. Now, in terms of like overall Zelda games, I would probably put it in the bottom half. I'm going to be honest, but in terms of just like how good it was as a game. Wow, I would put it above a lot of games that I've played, certainly. Kind of a close to maybe an 8.75 or approaching like a 9 out of 10 territory for me. The thing that surprised me the most was how much I really actually enjoyed the controls because that was definitely my biggest concern. It's totally touch-based controls, and I was like, boy, that does not sound good for a Zelda game. And it does take a little bit getting used to. I think the clunkiest thing about it is the way that you roll by like making a circle on the touchpad, and that's what causes Link to roll. But I mean, you don't really have to roll that often in the game, realistically. Um, but I was impressed by how well it controlled, and actually how much I enjoyed the control. I remember tracing the path for things like the boomerang, and thinking that was really cool. I really enjoyed being able to write on the screen, write notes on the screen. Um, and referred back to those later on during puzzle solving. I liked that a lot. I was really surprised by like kind of like the randomized loot system in the game, which is how you like build up your little ship. They had that Pirates of the Caribbean-esque character. That kind of felt like they were going for like a Jack Sparrow stereotype, which makes sense. I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean was extremely popular when Phantom Hourglass came out, but I forget that guy's name. It's like Linebeck or something. But I got a kick out of him. I do think that there are some criticisms of the game. It does get a little bit repetitive with the sailing, which I liked the sailing in Wind Waker, even though it's repetitive pretty well, because I just really liked how it established a sense of scale. But it's kind of hard to replicate that on the DS. I still liked the sailing more than the train stuff in Spirit Tracks, but it did get a little bit old toward the end of the game. But then again, I also really liked how I kind of had this individualized ship that I was able to upgrade over the course of the game. So it didn't get super stale for me. Um, I know that a lot of people have a lot of criticisms about the dungeon, the Temple of the Ocean King that you keep having to go back to after all the other like kind of main dungeons. And I could definitely see how people would get frustrated with that, especially because you have a time limit and, some people don't do really well with time limits. I actually kind of enjoyed all of that. Now, granted, I was playing through this game with a guide as I do with all Zelda games. Most games that I play, I have guide in hand because I just got things, I don't want to spend forever on a single game. I want to experience as many games as I can while I'm on this earth. Um, and so, I wasn't really ever at risk of getting stuck or anything like that, like some people may have played through the game. But I actually, I can see how there's definitely some legitimate criticisms with that centralized dungeon. But I did like it a lot more than I liked the one in Spirit Tracks. I can tell you that. Boy, they had some annoying puzzles and just gameplay in general in that Spirit Tracks dungeon. Whereas Phantom Hourglass, I didn't really feel that way. Kind of added like a sense of dread and a sense of stealth with those unkillable kind of guardians that patrolled that central dungeon, and then when you finally get the ability to actually deal with them offensively, that was really cool. But I think the thing that impressed me the most about Phantom Hourglass was kind of the scale of the bosses. Like there was multiple bosses I remember where they blow it up on both screens of the DS to really sort of capture that sense of scale that I thought worked really well. And I really thought they came up with some pretty inventive sort of combat scenarios with the touchpad. So yeah, really good stuff with Phantom Hourglass as a game that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it's number 11 on this list. Number 10, I have Chained Echoes. This is a JRPG, or it's really not a Japanese RPG because it wasn't made in Japan, but it's definitely a game that's in the style of a traditional JRPG. It came out in December 2022 it was mostly made by one guy, Matthias Linda. And this was a game that I was really kind of thankful that I heard about it at all because Game Informer reviewed it. Matt Miller reviewed it, gave it an 8.75. Think you were a little under the mark there, Matt, on that one. If you're listening to this, more likely he's not. But as soon as read that review and I saw the trailer and everything, I was like, oh man, this is a game that's right up my alley. It's a game that takes all these cues from JRPGs, which is definitely my favorite genre, and obviously modernizes them to a major degree. The reason, and it seems like most people who play Chained Echoes enjoy it, so it's underappreciated in the sense that I feel it should be kind of regarded as a modern classic. kind of like Persona 5 is in that genre, whereas I feel like it's something where you kind of have to go off the beaten path to find people who have played it, and those that have, obviously really enjoyed it. But there's some things that Chained Echoes does that I've never seen in a JRPG before that I think are incredible. There's a case to be made that it has the best combat system of any JRPG. There's one other game on this list a little bit later on that I might also put in contention for that spot. But Chain Echoes, it's so balanced in the sense that you do not have to deal with, and when a battle's over, your health completely regenerates, fills back up to full. You have to deal with, poison or anything like that. Like just as soon as the battle is done, it's over, and you're just back to full health. Same thing for your magic points, your magic system that determines your moves. And so as a result of that, the game is balanced where they expect you to go all out in every battle, even just like random encounters. And by the way, there aren't random encounters. Does the chrono trigger system where you can see them on the map and to kind of decide whether to engage or not, which a lot of people I think prefer to um, random encounters. I actually think I might like random encounters slightly more than that system, but it not I don't have a strong preference either way. But for the people who are anti random encounters. It's another thing Chain Echoes has going for it. But on top of that, that combat system and all the characters, it takes a very Final Fantasy VI approach where all the characters are totally unique. You get a lot of them, and they all have completely different abilities. But then they also have a job system layered on top of that where you can you have like specific skills that everybody can learn, and you sort of dole those out as you see fit. So that's very engaging. I've spent hours just tinkering around with the menu. So if you're into JRPG Tinkerfests, Chained Echoes is incredible on that front. And then it has this whole other combat system where you get into these mechs that I guess I haven't actually played the Xeno Saga games or Xenogears or anything like that, but I think that's probably kind of what they were going for there is that kind of feeling. But yeah, they'll have this completely different mech system, and that's really fun too. And they don't it doesn't overstay its welcome. That they utilize it really well. You're able to go around the open world with the mechs and sort of go back and find things that you might have missed. You actually have freedom of movement, which is really kind of liberating, particularly in the late game. So that was really awesome. Storytelling was fantastic in Chain Echoes, really surprisingly complicated and complex and deep. There's a lot of characters, a lot of stuff that you can miss, I would say, especially considering just how vast the game was. I mean, it's a massive, massive game. It took me dozens and dozens of hours to do, and I did do everything. I went fully 100% of the game, and they make it very easy for you to do that because there's this like board system that kind of is almost like a completionist checklist, and I love completionist checklists in games. That's just like uh, in the game itself, where you can go to this menu and you can see them, and then you're actually rewarded for checking things off. It actually kind of reminded me of the way that you unlock stuff in Smash games of old, like the Super Smash Bros. Brawl system. It's kind of like that Sakurai model of like unlocking little, uh, chipping away at little pieces of that big board of objectives. So that was super satisfying. Just everything that game was throwing down, I was just like picking it up hook, line, and sinker. I absolutely loved it. So for anybody, if any of that sounds good to you, or if you're a fan of that kind of video game, you absolutely should play Chained Echoes. And I guess part of the reason I consider it underappreciated is like I didn't see it up for um, any sort of nominations for best game, best JRPG, best story, best music, and I thought it excelled in all of those categories. I think it's a masterpiece, a modern masterpiece, one of my favorite games of all time. So Chained Echoes number 10 on this list. Now number 9. This is going to be a very interesting entry. This is a game that I have played extensively over the last several weeks. I actually haven't played it in about a week. But there for a couple weeks, my wife Reagan and I were really going hard on this. This is a game that I played as a kid, and then every once in a while I just get the itch for it, and I pick it back up, and it impresses me every time. And that's Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duelists of the Roses for the PS2. I don't know if it was actually on. I think it might have been a PS2 exclusive. I don't know if it was actually on Xbox or GameCube. I don't think it was because there were so many Yu-Gi-Oh games back then, and they had exclusives on like all the different consoles. It was absolutely absurd, which just goes to show like how titanic that franchise was. Now, in terms of my history with Yu-Gi-Oh, I did enjoy the show as a kid. I was the kind of the right age for it. when it came out. I had, I it was fairly popular at my school, so I played it a little. I didn't, I had a deck basically. I don't think I had a super competitive deck or anything like that, but I did have a deck. I might even still have it somewhere if I like dug around in my uh, storage long enough. And then I had a traditional Yu-Gi-Oh game that I played a lot on the Game Boy Advance. That was, I think, Stairway to the Destined Duel Worldwide Edition. It had a very complicated title. But I played that a lot, and that was like traditional Yu-Gi-Oh rules. But what was interesting about Yu-Gi-Oh games at that time is a lot of them had not traditional Yu-Gi-Oh rules. Like I remember there was the Falsebound Kingdom for the GameCube, which I never played, but that was like some sort of like just sort of more traditional RPG. I don't even know if it had cards. And then my brother had the Forbidden something or other on the PS1. I think that was kind of a precursor to Duels of the Roses to a degree. And that one had like this totally unique system of combining cards to create other cards that was not in the regular game at all. And you kind of it had like this weird time thing where you woke up and you were like in the ancient Egypt era, and then like you, or I guess that was like a dream, and then you would wake up and actually you were in the modern era, and like very strange game. But Duels of the Roses was maybe the weirdest of all of them because it takes that system, the Forbidden Duelist or whatever it was, and takes it into this chess-based kind of grid system. It's really the first my first turn-based strategy RPG that I've ever played because it's like a chess-like grid with movement, and it's still with cards, but you move them across the board, and there's like a lot of strategy when it comes to the terrain and when to attack other cards. There's a lot of things that you a lot of unknowns because your opponents will keep their cards face down, and you'll keep your cards face down, and neither of you really knows what the other is holding until they engage each other in battle. So it's extremely rich strategy game uh under a Yu-Gi-Oh, a light Yu-Gi-Oh sheen, like that it's not very faithful to the actual game of Yu-Gi-Oh itself at all. And then weirdly the whole thing is wrapped up in like this War of the Roses, like sort of like where you had these Yu-Gi-Oh characters looking like the anime characters from the show standing in for actual historical figures. Very bonkers concept, but the reason I love the game and still love the game to this day is just, and by the way, you never hear people talking about it now. You know what I mean? Like in terms of just Yu-Gi-Oh games, it's like completely forgotten, I feel like. But I legitimately think that it is a really great turn-based strategy RPG, very deep strategy, very challenging game. You really have to learn the ins and outs of your deck in order to succeed. It has obviously because it's Yu-Gi-Oh, it has these deck building elements as well. So you're constantly like trying to optimize your deck with the resources that you have or with options that you have. But then also it has like I would argue much deeper strategy than the actual card game. The only things that hold it back a little bit, the AI is not too strong. There will definitely be times where they'll make like really boneheaded decisions. Generally, the game is tuned very hard, and so I think maybe they weakened the AI maybe like at the last minute at times just to or they at least they have little quirks that you can exploit just so you'll have a chance because I mean some of those battles would probably be like almost unwinnable if they didn't. Um, and you really have to know about how to combine cards in your deck to make stronger ones, which they definitely do not explain to you at all. And then you also have to keep your deck cost below any of your opponents to even be able to challenge them. So it basically has a handicap on you at all times. So it's a really challenging game. But gosh, if you really get into it, and I imagine a lot of people probably didn't, but if you really get into it, it is, I'm telling you, it is really satisfying. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you're a fan of either Yu-Gi-Oh! Or just deck building games in general, or turn-based strategy games, I really think that you should give Yu-Gi-Oh! The Duels of the Roses a look if you have a PS2. Surely it wouldn't be too expensive to get, and I think you'd probably be surprised by how fun it is. So, yeah, that's number 9 on my list. Number 8 is a game that really means a lot to me. It was in a lot of ways one of the most important, if not the most important games in my early childhood to get me into the medium and make me a fan of video games in general. And I still have a lot of love for it today. And that is Spyro Year of the Dragon, the third entry in the Spyro trilogy on the PlayStation 1 made by Insomniac. I have it as this high on the underrated list, not because people don't consider it to be a good game, but I think it is often generally considered to be worse than Spyro 2. And in some cases worse than even Spiral 1. And I strongly disagree with both of those opinions. I think that Spyro Year of the Dragon is by far the best game in a series. And you could argue that some of that has to do with. Obviously, well, not way more. I mean, I played all those games when I was a kid, but Year of the Dragon was the first one I played, and so it definitely I have the most nostalgia for that game. It's certainly an S tier nostalgia game for me. I will fully admit that. But at the same time, I've gone back and played those games many times since I was a kid, obviously, including through the uh, not very good, I would argue, remakes, the Reignited trilogy. It particularly doesn't do Spyro Year of the Dragon any favors, and I think that that might further um, lead people to believe that it's a inferior game to other games of the series when it, especially in the original version form, it really wasn't. And we were able to really test this last year, which was the Year of the Dragon, by the way. Um, and when my wife played through all three on the Spyro Reignited trilogy, and I played through all three kind of side by side on the PS1 game, where we would switch off the PS1 originals, and we kind of agreed that it seemed like for Spyro 1 the reignited version probably was better, but for Spyro 2 and especially Spyro 3, it was very clear that the originals really hold up significantly better than the remakes. But yeah, Spyro the Year of the Dragon. There's so much cool stuff that they included in there. One of the main things is the way that they really varied up the gameplay, which I think was something that you saw from Crash Bandicoot as well. With Crash Bandicoot Warp, they really varied up the gameplay in that third entry. And yeah, that can be polarizing to people. I know some people prefer Crash Bandicoot 2. I kind of prefer Crash Bandicoot 2 to Warped myself, but it is close. But with Spyro 3, compared to other games of the series, I do not think it's close. I think it is like way better than any of the other Spyro games, and I actually consider it to be one of the all-time, certainly my top five greatest um, 3D platformers of all time, up there with Super Mario Galaxy, Jack and Daxter. And a lot of that has to do with the variety. I think that they not only did they create all of these other playable characters, and that includes Sparks. There was like a sort of top-down shooter type gameplay that they did with Sparks. They have the kangaroo who's able to jump really high and has these kicks. They have the penguin with which is funny. He's a flightless bird, but he flies around. He has full flight capabilities, and he can free fly around entire levels. They have like the really strong guy Bentley, that's like a Yeti that kind of wreaks havoc on all his levels, and then you have the monkey, which Agent Nine, which that was kind of like a precursor to what they did ultimately, obviously with Ratchet and Clank, just a couple years later, where it's a kind of 3D shooter element. So you have all that, but then like even with Spyro himself, they introduced all these different gameplay varieties. Like they have the different vehicles that you can control. There's a submarine, which that one admittedly probably isn't the best one, but then they have like the skateboarding that was really fun. They obviously have the flight levels return. They added races to the flight levels, which I thought was fun and pretty intense at times. And then that you even play as Hunter the cheetah for in those flight levels where he has like these bespoke little challenges that he has to do. So it's just like they were throwing all these different things at you. And then I also thought that the level design kind of got back a little bit to the grandness of Spyro 1. I still think, pound for pound, the level design of Spyro 1 might be the best in the series just for how vast those levels got and how impressively layered they were. Spyro 2, I felt like they really simplified the level design to its detriment, and I found a lot of those levels to be pretty boring as a result. In Spyro 3, I thought it struck a nice middle ground between those games. So, and then on top of that, I really think that the villain and the storytelling of Spyro Year of the Dragon is leagues ahead of what was there for Spyro 1 and 2. Spyro 1 basically has no story at all. Spyro 2, they create these characters, but there's not really much of a narrative with them. There's just like this villain who has no arc or anything interesting about him that is leading to his villainy. Whereas this third one, it's like there's this you're in the old dragon realms and like magic has faded away from it because the dragons left and they were driven out by this evil sorceress. So she's trying to capture the dragon eggs and then she wants to like rip off their wings for like this spell. So that's like really kind of dark. And then she has this apprentice who is on her side for the majority of the game, and she actually like turns sides and has this weird like love storyline with Hunter the Cheetah. It's like all like as a kid, I gotta tell you, I was eating this up. I mean, it was like the first time I experienced story in a game. So I was really floored by a lot of it. But even now, I think that it's really kind of cool to see that they were actually kind of trying to tell a story, unlike with what they did with the first two games. And so I really appreciate that about Year of the Dragon as well. So it just really stripped out a lot of the frustrating stuff from the second game. A lot of those orb challenges were really lame. The dragon eggs themselves are just obviously the best object or collectible in the game. Like you get a cute dragon that hatches every single time you collect one, as opposed to like a boring orb like you got in Spyro 2, or the dragons were in the ice or whatever, the rock. In the first game were cool, but there was a lot less of them. So yeah, just everything in my opinion about Year of the Dragon is better than the earlier games in the series. I absolutely love that game, and that's why it's number 8 on this list. Number 7. I wish I could say this was the last game in this series that I'm going to be talking about, but it's not. This is another Zelda game, and this is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which I consider to be the greatest 3D Zelda game under the classic sort of sense of what Zelda was. I will admit that I think Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are definitely better than Twilight Princess, but for the original sort of 2D blueprint, or I'm sorry, 3D blueprint for the Zelda series that was sort of pioneered by Ocarina of Time, I think Twilight Princess is the best one. I think it's the only one that I would say is better than Ocarina of Time. Um, Twilight Princess is just so good. It was by far the longest of the Zelda games. It had way, 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 way more depth to its storytelling and its approach to storytelling as well. Than compared to any of the other games in the series, it actually had like a cast of characters that they really tried to establish in the beginning with that were from Link's village. That I thought they did a good job with. One thing that Twilight Princess does really well, as one of my favorite things, is it has a really slow beginning, and I know a lot of people view that negatively, but I love slow beginnings. That's honestly one of my favorite storytelling devices is things starting off really slow, and then as a result, like they ratchet, and when they start ratcheting things up as the game goes on, it hits even harder. Fallout 3 is another example of doing that really well, where you spend that first hour in the vault. And I think that's done really effectively. Red Dead Redemption 2, I think, is another good example where you had to do the missions in the snow before you finally get out into the wilds later on. And Twilight Princess is one of the I gotta tell you, one of the best examples of that. I really enjoyed and value that they were willing to take their time, and they trusted the audience to stick with it, and hopefully get invested in that village so that it means more when calamity strikes, which it does, of course, pretty early on in that game, and then you have to go become a hero and take care of it. But in terms of the dungeon design, I think really even like counting Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's just the best dungeons of the series. I might argue the best and deepest combat in the series. Link already starts off with like a really strong move set, and then he adds more moves and techniques over the course of the game. And the fact that he's taught those moves by the spirit of the Link that came before him from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask is such a freaking awesome touch. Um, I thought, it came out definitely as like in kind of like the edgy mid 2000s, so he has like this emo wolf thing going on. Love that. The character of Midna is often cited as one of the great Zelda characters of all time, and I would certainly agree with that. She's definitely the best sort of companion character that you get in the series by a wide margin. And I really like. So I've only ever played the Wii version, so I did not play the GameCube version. And I never had a Wii U, so I did never play the Wii U version. But I really like the approach to motion controls that they did with the Wii version of Twilight Princess. It's not too demanding or in your face. I think Skyward Sword they went maybe a little bit too far in that direction, where they wanted your sword swings to line up with how you actually swing the remote, and they tried to get a little bit too intricate with some of that stuff. Whereas Twilight Princess, they kept it light, and it certainly was revolutionary at the time, but I think it holds up better because of its simplicity. And you still get the satisfying stuff like aiming the bow with the remote and firing that way, and that still I think ages very well. Whereas like with the sword stuff, you don't have to get too intricate with the making sure that you swing it in the precise direction that you want the sword to be swung. So I definitely like that. I really love that version of Hyrule. I just, it doesn't, obviously, it seems kind of constrained compared to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom now, but at the time it was the most open and expansive of the Zelda series, and that version of Hyrule really was impressive at the time. And like I remember that version of Hyrule Town or the Castle Town, whatever you want to call it, the capital of Hyrule, also being just like super impressive at the time. And like it had all these NPCs going around, and it had time passage and all things that were in Ocarina of Time, but just done at a much grander scale in Twilight Princess. It definitely fed off. I felt the fervor that people felt for the Lord of the Rings franchise, which was just absolutely massive at that time. And I felt like they took some cues from just the aesthetics and the sensibilities of that series into Twilight Princess, and all those things came together. I thought to make an absolutely amazing game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I would say it is the best Zelda game outside of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I certainly think it holds up better than most 3D Zelda games, and I think at the time it was the best. And I just think that it never gets credit for any of those things today. I feel like it is a game that is weirdly kind of forgotten and overlooked in that series. And it makes sense that Ocarina of Time is the one that is kind of held up the most just because it was the first one and it was truly unbelievable for a 1998 game. There's no question about it. But man, like Twilight Princess, I feel was unbelievable for a 2006 game. And it was definitely critically received very well at the time, but I just feel like it hasn't had the staying power of some of the other games in the series, and I feel that it should. So, for those reasons, it is number 7 on my list. Number 6 on my list. This is actually the game that I consider the greatest 3D platformer that I've ever played. And I think if you look up too many lists, you won't see it ranked that highly. And so for that reason, I have it ranked at number 6. Number 6 is Psychonauts 2 from 2021, Double Fine. I was one of the few who played Psychonauts 1 back in the day when it came out. I had it on PS2, so I think it originally was an Xbox exclusive, so I didn't play it right away, but pretty much right when it came to PS2, I did pick it up. Now, granted, I didn't buy it myself, it was a gift. But it was a good gift. It was a game that I enjoyed. I didn't actually make it through the full game until adulthood, but I did appreciate it at the time and enjoyed playing it and really liked the style of it. The level design is absolutely incredible. It's just an unbelievably creative game, one of the most creative games of all time. And Psychonauts 2, I think, does everything that Psychonauts 1 did very well, but improves it to such a degree that it's not even close. Like Psychonauts 2, I think, is a drastically better game than Psychonauts 1. And a lot of that comes down to the control. The control of Psychonauts 2 is extremely intuitive, really strong. They do a good job of not like taking away all of the powers that you had in Psychonauts 1 and instead just building upon what you sort of had in Psychonauts 1, which I think is very impressive. That still has the incredibly creative level design, like truly just the most creative 3D platforming levels that you'll ever see in a game. And there's so much symbolism and storytelling behind the environments that you're going through, and particularly in the context of these characters, because obviously each level is you're going through someone's mind. So it just kind of lays itself out to do that. But each level just means so much more than a typical, Mario level or even a typical Spyro level or, the Jack and Daxter open world meant a lot because it was all interconnected. But those you didn't feel like this emotional attachment to, and like there wasn't like this emotional storytelling linked to each of the places. They were just kind of areas of this map that you were traversing. Where Psychonauts 2, like everything just means so much more. And the way that they were able to really change up the visuals of each level in Psychonauts 2 in particular, compared to Psychonauts 1 was really impressive. And there is just truly some of the greatest levels of all time, extremely varied. All that in Psychonauts 2. But then it also has like sort of like this exploration element in the sort of hub area in the main world, which I enjoyed. It's a very satisfying completionist game to get all the different collectibles and everything like that. And then for on a storytelling level, I was very impressed. That's a story with twists and turns, really strong characters, way better than what you will ever see in a 3D platformer. And so, for all those reasons, I think it is the best that I've ever played. And the best part is that you can see and I think this does sort of add to the intrigue in the game, and certainly makes it helps you get more invested in it. Is the incredible Psychonauts documentary that chronicles the creation of the game from 2015 all the way through when it was released in 2021. And there's even an episode that they added later on, of sort of the aftermath of Psychonauts 2. That's called Psych Odyssey. You can watch it for free on YouTube. It's like 32 parts or something. It's extremely um, uh detailed, I guess. And there's a lot of twists and turns in the over the course of making that game. It was not a development that went smoothly. We can say that. And so it's just an incredible watch, and I think it adds to the intrigue of what was an incredible game. But quite frankly, I already would have put Psychonauts 2 as the best 3D platformer even before watching that documentary. I just think it is that good. So if you're a fan of 3D platformers at all, you got to check out Psychonauts 2. It is a masterpiece. And now that takes us into the top five most underappreciated video games of all time, and we're gonna do with my number one most underappreciated Zelda game. This is the final game in the Zelda series that I'm gonna be highlighting on this list, and this is the one that surprised me the most, and surpassed my expectations the most, and a game that I feel more than any other in that series, you will never hear brought up as one of the greats, and that is The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons. I think is a one of the most underappreciated video games of all time. Number five on this list. So I mentioned that I my kind of trajectory with the series whenever I played through them all, and going into playing all the Zelda games, I had played very few of them. I played Twilight Princess a little bit as a kid, but didn't finish it until way later. Same thing for Ocarina of Time. The first Zelda game I ever finished was actually the first Zelda game, which I played through the GameCube Collector's Edition collection. But even that was like when I was in high school or something like that. So, I was definitely a PlayStation first player as a kid, and so I didn't have like this great attachment to the Zelda series. So, but it was obviously always a series that I wanted to really get into, and then I finally did and played through most of them. I remember when Oracle of Ages and Seasons were out. I definitely remember seeing them in the store and just them being advertised at the time. They definitely were kind of following in that Pokemon vein of having two different games or versions of a game. I did not realize that they're actually two basically entirely separate games. Like there's some overlap, and whenever you finish one and you play the other, you can actually bring some of your stuff over, which I think is awesome. Whenever you go between them, and like the second game is sort of enhanced if you've already done the first one, but you can do them in either order. And then whenever you finish both, then you get like this sort of epilogue where there's like the final big bad and sort of a boss rush there at the end. Um, I played Oracle of Seasons before Ages. I can't remember how I made that decision, but that is just the way it shook out whenever I did those, and I was going through the timeline. And this is coming off of like A Link to the Past. Let me actually pull up the Zelda timeline so I could see exactly what the order was in which I played these games. Um, if I look at it right here, so this is like the updated 2023 version. So the version that I was looking at was um, older than this. But so like I said, I went through Skyward Sword, Minish Cap. I did skip Four Swords and went to Ocarina of Time. Then I went to the sort of the retro timeline where the heroes quote unquote defeated. So it goes to Link to the Past, and then it was Oracle of Seasons and Ages right after that. And so I was definitely underwhelmed by Link to the Past, and then I knew I was going from an SNES game to a Game Boy Color game, and expecting, my expectations were, I think, suitably in check going into those after playing Link to the Past, especially considering no one could, I've never heard Oracle of Ages and Seasons being held up as like some of the great Zelda games. And I gotta tell you, I was blown away by Oracle Seasons. Not only did I think it was better than Link to the Past, I think it is the best 2D, after playing them all, I think it's the best 2D Zelda game in the series, other than Link's Awakening. I have to give the number one spot. And I only played the Switch version, so I might have thought Oracle Seasons was better than the Game Boy original, but I did play the Switch remaster or remake of the game, so I'm just going based on that. That's definitely my favorite. But Oracle Seasons would be my number two. I'd put it above even Link Between Worlds on the 3DS, which is an amazing game. But yeah, I mentioned Phantom Hourglass early on this list as well. I put it above those. And I also really was not a big fan of Oracle of Ages. I actually would put Oracle of Ages below Link to the Past, or maybe I would put it right above, but it would be really close. Like they're almost equals in my mind in terms of quality. Whereas Oracle of Seasons I thought was like way far and away above those. And There's several reasons for that. Obviously, the classic Zelda stuff we don't even really have to get into here. It has great classic Zelda dungeons, great classic Zelda bosses. I did definitely think that the dungeons and bosses and seasons were significantly better than the ones in Ages, and really than a lot of the ones in Link to the Past as well. But I really like the world that you're in Oracle of Seasons, which is different from the world that you're in any other Zelda game. Even the one in Ages is different, and in seasons the sort of central mechanic is changing the different seasons, and I like that better because that felt unique at the time, compared to Link to the Past. You had the light and dark world, and Oracle of Ages you kind of had like the present and the past, and that felt very similar to me to the light and the dark world. And then of course there's also the analog with Ocarina of Time, which also kind of has the time jumping mechanic, whereas Oracle of Seasons changing the seasons was like a totally unique. But then it did have this underworld called Subrosia, which is like this volcanic area that you have to go through pretty much every time that after you do a dungeon, and like you sort of like go through it to unlock other parts of the map. And I was just so shocked by this underworld. Like everybody down there, all the denizens of Subrosia basically look like the Final Fantasy Dark Mage. So like the picture of Vivi kind of look like that, except for they're wearing a hood instead of like a pointed hat. So basically, all you see is just like their cloak, and then like two light, two like their eyes, basically like they're like the points of light that are their eyes, and they're so sharply written, those characters, that it just cracked me up. There was so much going on, and there's every time I would go down there, I just thought it was such a delight. There was like this this running gag down there where there's one of them is like this pop star, and everybody thinks that she's so desirable and everybody's so into her and she's so famous, and she's literally just looks exactly like all the other ones except she has a little bow on her head. And that to me was just so funny. I just every time I went down there, I just got such a kick out of it. And so I think that is a big reason that I loved Oracle Season so much. And then on top of that, it was just like all the other things that Zelda games do really well: exploration in the big open world. The changing of the seasons I really liked because it really they clearly they were trying to make it as beautiful as possible on the Game Boy Color, and it was it had color finally. And I remember what that was like going from like playing Game Boy, Pokemon Black and White to going to Gold and Silver where it was had color, and it was like amazing at the time. And I'm sure our Oracle of Seasons would have looked incredible to me at the time too. And honestly, I still thought it looked pretty incredible playing it in 2023. And I just everything that it was laying down for me just totally worked. I loved the bosses. I love Subrosia. I love the overworld and changing the seasons. There's like this mechanic where you get one of three possible little animal characters to ride, and I think that's like super awesome. I loved the ring system that it does share with Ages, where it's like, but it's like you're basically like sort of customizing Link in a way with like these different abilities, and you can swap these rings out interchangeably and power them up in different ways, and like sort of set them up for different boss fights. Like I remember there was this one boss fight where there was a lot of sand moving around. And yeah, that was a little bit frustrating, but you could put this ring on and it was like Link isn't moved by sand. And it's like, oh, well, great. That totally trivializes this fight. And then you just go through and it's no problem. So there's just so much like cool little stuff like that in Oracle Seasons. It definitely was a game that I went in with low expectations, and those expectations were widely exceeded. And I still look back on it extremely fondly. It's a game that I love dearly, and it is a game that you never ever hear held up as one of the great Zelda games or one of the great just 2D Game Boy games in general. And when you do hear people talk about in Seasons, it seems like I often hear people say Ages is better, which is mind blowing to me. I just thought that nothing in that game was better than Seasons. Thought it was worse in every way possible. So yeah, Seasons is just definitely the most underrated Zelda game, and one of my all-time favorites. So that's why it's number 5 on this list. Number 4, this is a game that I think did get a lot of praise, but I think the praise that it got was like way out of line with what it should have got, because I honestly think that it is, boy, it certainly let me if I pull up my list of like my favorite games of all time, it is my favorite game that has come out um in the last 5 years. You know, nothing that has come out since then, I think, is as good as this game. And there's only one other game this decade that came out that I think could match it in terms of quality. And that's Octopath Traveler 2. the sequel to the Switch exclusive Octopath Traveler from Square Enix. So this is I played Octopath Traveler 1. That's a game I love too. And I love that game dearly. It's one of my favorite JRPGs outside of the Final Fantasy series. It was definitely the biggest reason I was interested in buying a Switch at the time because it was this Switch exclusive and it looked just so incredible and it was a game that I had high expectations for. I bought the Switch, I played it, and it met my expectations, maybe even exceeded them a little bit. I thought it was absolutely awesome. But it wasn't perfect. I don't think the storytelling in Octopath One was on the level of like a truly like an all-time great JRPG. I thought that because you had different characters, it had enough variety and like the combat. This is the game that I mentioned earlier with Chain Echoes. This is the other JRPG that I think sort of has a claim for best JRPG combat. I just remember getting in random encounters in Octopath Traveler and just being excited because I was like, man, I can't wait to do some more combat in this game. And I never felt that way about turn-based battles in any other series. But Octopath Traveler 2, I just think took what that foundation of Octopath Traveler 1 and improved on it to such a degree. I think it is truly one of the greatest games of all time, a modern masterpiece. Like if you wanted to tell me this is the greatest game of all time or the greatest JRPG ever made, I would be like, yeah, that's a valid opinion. I'm not gonna argue too hard against that. It's certainly in my top 10 of all time. And the only other game I can think of that has come out this decade that I would put in the same class is Last of Us Part Two. And I think I would probably give the edge to Last of Us just for how bold that storytelling was and how fun the gameplay is. But I mean, it is a close shave between the two of them. The storytelling I think is one of the biggest areas in Octopath Traveler 2 that just got a huge upgrade. I was blown away starting that game and just like going through all of the characters' first chapters and kind of the way the structure of the game. If you haven't played Octopath Traveler, is there's 8 characters. You could pick any of them to start off the game, and then the first kind of leg of the journey is going around and getting all the different characters that make up your JRPG party, and you see their sort of first chapters unfold, and then you kind of go through the rest of their chapters over the course of the game, and it's very episodic in that way, where you're tackling one character's chapter at a time. And and Octopath One they all had 4 chapters, and Octopath Two they actually vary, where they range from like 3 to 5 chapters. And then they also threw in a couple of some other chapters where you have 2 characters that sort of team up to take on a problem, and that was really cool. Octopath Traveler 2, that was not Octopath 1. And then everything kind of comes together at like the very end, and there's like a super big boss battle at the end. Octopath Traveler 2 did all that, but way better. The storytelling with the characters, like I mentioned, was just on a whole nother level. I could not believe starting out that game and just seeing the difference in quality for the narratives between all of these characters compared to the narratives of the original cast. And all of the stories, I would say, have twists and turns and unexpected developments. All of them have really emotional moments that hit hard and often. You're never really, with very few exceptions, you're almost never going through a chapter where you're like, all right, this one's kind of weaker than most of them. They're all like at a super high bar of quality, and I just couldn't believe how strong it was. And then mixing all that together is just like this incredible world that they created. It's a different world map than what they did with Octopath One. It's actually an islanded map where you have two sort of continents, and then there's like a third. It's kind of island that the hunter is from to the south, and that's like kind of its own thing. So it's really like 3 different land masses, and they all have different cultures, and that is noticeable in the game. Different sorts of enemies that you face, and it matters sort of where you are between the two. You have to get this ship that allows you to sail between them, was a really cool element to the game. And there's like an exploration element to the Octopath Traveler games that I think is really impressive compared to most JRPGs, particularly modern JRPGs. The combat, like I said, unbelievable. I really think that just like have each enemy having like their own weaknesses, and then they have like a certain amount of hits that you have to hit them on, and then they break, and that's where you want to like really pile on the damage. Very satisfying to figure that out and navigate that. Incredible job system. The job system in Octopath Traveler 2 was so much more customizable than the one in the first game, where you could only have one person on a job at a time, whereas in Octopath Traveler 2, you get up to three on a job at a time. So you could have like three clerics or three warriors or three thief. I remember I really used the thief a lot actually in Octopath Traveler 2, where that had a very useful skill set, or the hunter. Um, and there's like there's nice little touches where they actually change the outfit of the character depending on what job they have, which is really cool. There's hidden jobs in Octopath Traveler 2 that are a lot more unique than the hidden jobs were in Octopath Traveler 1, where they were just kind of obviously like the super jobs, like the best ones in the game. And you had to like beat these really tough bosses to unlock them. So they were basically like relegated to the late game. Whereas Octopath Traveler 2, you can start working on them very early. Some of them, and that was really surprising and unique. So all that was just incredible. Spent so much time tinkering with my party and really sort of min maxing them. All the exploration elements was incredible. The storytelling in the each of the bespoke chapters was just fantastic. The game really came together at the end in a way that was like unbelievably better than the first game. Like it was like on a way higher level of execution in terms of just like the run up to the ending. Um, it's obviously just a gorgeous game. Like I mean, one of the most beautiful games of all time. I'm sure I ranked it very highly on my most beautiful video games list. Just everything about Octopath Traveler 2, I think is just incredible. I truly think it is a masterpiece, a 10 out of 10 experience. One of only 11 games that I've ever played. I've finished well over 300 games, and I've only given 11 of them a 10 out of 10. And Octopath Traveler 2 is one of them. So cannot speak highly of it enough. And just the fact that the reason that I consider it so underappreciated is because, like to me, this should have been like the release of Persona 5 or Baldur's Gate 3 or earlier this year, Expedition 33, where it's like a game comes out and everybody's like, oh, this is it. This is game of the year. This is a complete and utter masterpiece. Octopath Traveler 2 didn't get that, and I think it should have. That's the level of quality that I would consider it to be on. So for those reasons, I think it's number 4 on my underappreciated list. So moving on now to number 3. This is, I make no bones about it, or there's no secret about it, that Final Fantasy is my favorite video game series. I talked about Final Fantasy 16 in the last list, but to me, there's always been one Final Fantasy game that stands out as like the most underappreciated, particularly in the series, but I think just in games in general, it is not held up as the masterpiece that I consider it to be. And that's number 3 on this list, which is Final Fantasy 15. So, Final Fantasy 15, it is a mess of a game in a lot of ways. It is a polarizing game. It is a game that when it first came out was not, I mean, it was extremely successful, but it was not held in the same degree as a lot of the classic Final Fantasies of the past, your Final Fantasy 4s, your Final Fantasy 6, your Final Fantasy 7, all the PS1 Final Fantasies, Final Fantasy 10. I mean, almost no one kind of considers it to be in that lineage, and I gotta tell you, like, I wouldn't put it above, Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy 9, and like the all timers like that. But in terms, or 6, but in terms of 4, I think Final Fantasy 15 smokes Final Fantasy 4. I think it smokes Final Fantasy 8. I think that it is an awesome game, but it does kind of require you to go outside of the game itself, and I think that is where people kind of have a problem with it. Where to get the most out of it, you do need to do all the DLCs. You do need to watch the little anime series that they made for it. You do need to watch the movie Kingslave, and all of these elements on their own are not super strong. But when you wrap them all together in the Final Fantasy 15 package, I think it creates a very unique, varied, and awesome video or like experience. It's really a multimedia experience at this point, quite frankly. And I know a lot of people can't get behind that, and I think that that's fair. If that's you, then Final Fantasy 15 might not be the game for you. But if you can buy into all those different elements and do them in a specific order in particular, then Final Fantasy 15 is an amazing experience. And for me, when I played Final Fantasy 15 for the first time I played it, I think I really just went through. So obviously all the DLCs were not out when I played it for the first time. I think I played it for the first time in 2016. Well, it came out in 2016, so I think it was 2017. And so I don't even know if I had the Royal Pack yet for Final Fantasy 15, which is definitely required. Like you definitely need to have the Royal Edition of Final Fantasy 15 if you're gonna get the most out of it for sure. But the Arden DLC obviously wasn't out, which is, I mean, huge is a critical component to why I think that this game is so good. So I was definitely missing out on that. But I think I was able to do most of the character DLCs, which are incredibly strong. Um, but Final Fantasy 15, it is a weird game, even without all the multimedia stuff. Like just the structure of the game that they created is odd because it's a very open world game. It's kind of sort of lauded as the first truly open world Final Fantasy game at the time. But then this, once you get to a certain point, it's like an incredibly linear game that is I think kind of weird for people to sort of wrap their heads around. And I think the thing that gets in the way for a lot of people with Final Fantasy 15 is it truly is unlike any other game that's ever been released. It does not conform to any particular themes or genres or just boundaries that I think people kind of create for themselves. And so for uh, different players come across different parts of the game that they really don't like, but that just wasn't the case for me with Final Fantasy 15. I pretty much loved everything that they were throwing at me. I loved the open world activities. The side quests themselves were pretty terrible, I will admit, but they were basically just excuses to go out and explore the open world more, and that I thought was really fantastic. I enjoyed the hunts, going around on the hunts, and just spending more time in the world and doing the combat, which I also really enjoyed. I know people have kind of criticized it as being very simplistic combat. And they're not wrong. It is pretty simplistic. It's not the greatest combat system in the world, but um, the way that it makes you feel, the kinetic nature of it, I think is very laudable. I really enjoyed the explosiveness of the magic system, which I think a lot of people just sort of glossed over because it's not super well explained. But you create these absolutely massive, like neutron bombs of explosions with the magic system that I think is really satisfying. I love the warp strike, which is kind of the central mechanic of the game, where Noctis, the main character, throws a weapon and then like it connects with wherever he throws it and like he teleports to that spot, and so you can pull off a lot of combos that way. I like being able to utilize the different moves in the party. You truly felt like a party that was sort of working together to overcome these enemies. And I thought that they did a really great job with the characters and giving each of the characters more depth than you expect on the surface. I'm not going to say that it's the greatest Final Fantasy cast of all time. It's certainly one of the least varied Final Fantasy casts, which I think is to its detriment. But they did such a good job, especially like I said, if you go through all of the different materials that they created to supplement the main Final Fantasy 15 game. There's so much great stuff, so much great depth to these characters, particularly the villain Arden Izunya. I think has a claim. Now, my number one villain for Final Fantasy is Sephiroth. I think that it's almost impossible for somebody to pass him for me. But I will say, if someone wanted to argue that Arden is the best Final Fantasy villain, I'd be like, hey man, that's a good opinion. That's a good take right there. I'm not gonna argue very strongly against it. So, I thought that he was just like incredibly well done, especially if, like I said, you do all of the extra stuff. Because it wasn't super, his arc wasn't super well illustrated in the original version of the game, but it's a game that definitely was updated and is a lot stronger now than it was upon release in 2016. So, yeah, obviously there's a lot of caveats with what I'm saying right here. And so I can kind of see, and that's why it's not number one on my list or anything. But I have it very high because I do think that Final Fantasy 15, unlike some of these games that I have high on this list, like your Octopath Traveler 2 or your Psychonauts 2 or your Chain Echoes, games that were super well received, but not well received by a wide group of people. Final Fantasy 15, I think, was certainly much less well received than I think it should be, especially now. Like you can't really go back and look at the reviews of Final Fantasy 15 because they're outdated. Like they're not. That's not really the game that exists there for you to play now with the Royal Edition and all of the DLCs. And then on top of that, obviously, and I can't argue with this, but the reviews can't really take into consideration all the extra stuff, the Kingsglaive, the anime, and all of that. Which I think that you do need to get the full picture. And whenever you add all those things together, it truly becomes an S tier experience, in my opinion, as a fan of the series. and as someone who's willing to admit the faults of the game itself. So, for all those reasons, Final Fantasy 15. If anybody's listening to this and you have experienced Final Fantasy 15 in the way that I'm sort of laying out here, then you know what I'm talking about. Like if you get it, if it hits you at the right time and you're open minded enough to accept all that, it wants you to engross yourself in, it will pay you back tenfold. And that's definitely what happened to me with Final Fantasy 15, and for that reason, it's number three on this list. Okay, boy, we're getting into the top two now. And my number one is a game that I think it's kind of more in the vein of like a Chain Echoes, where I think generally people who play it agree that it's very good, but it's definitely the most off the beaten path of the games on this list. But number two, this is a game that I truly think, just in every sense of the word, is underappreciated. I think it's by far the best game in the series, and almost never, if ever, hear anyone make that argument because it's come at a time where the series is really hitting some bad releases. I'm talking about Pokemon Sun and Moon, number two. And I'm talking about Pokemon Sun and Moon specifically, not Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which I think were significantly worse than the original releases of the game. So that's another thing working against Pokemon Sun and Moon. So Pokemon Sun and Moon, this was a game that came out during the 3DS era of Pokemon. This was Gen, I guess, 7. So it came out after X and Y, which was the first sort of 3D Pokemon game on the 3DS. And it boy, where to even start? Like Pokemon X and Y. I guess one thing about Sun and Moon that's interesting is that it is sandwiched, I would argue, between some of the worst Pokemon releases that we've ever seen. X and Y I thought was not a strong game at all. It really fails in almost every category. Like the one thing that it had going for it was that it was in 3D, and that was like really exciting at the time. But even then, it ran like absolute ass, and the story that they were trying to tell was awful. The new characters were horrendous. Then I would argue a lot of the new Pokemon were not very good, to the point where they were having to heavily rely on Pokemon from past games. Like they added what, like 70 Pokemon, whereas like there was 400 something in the regional deck. So they were leaning extremely heavily on previous Pokemon, and then they had the Mega Evolution sort of uh, trend that was very successful with some people. I never really thought it was that cool, to be honest, because very few Pokemon were able to actually take advantage of it. But they had that kind of crush that they were leaning on as well. And then, but after Sun and Moon, you had Pokemon Sword and Shield, which was just a total farce of a game. I mean, I do think it's slightly better than Pokemon X and Y, but his first game on the Switch ran like ass, just like X and Y, looked like ass. They took out the national deck, so like it's the first Pokemon game where you can't actually get all the Pokemon like on a code level. Like obviously you couldn't just in Gen 3, people like to use that as an example, Ruby and Sapphire. Yeah, you could not get all the Pokemon in the game at launch, but they knew that, and so they released games in Gen 3 like Fire Red, Leaf Green, and then also the Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD games, so that you could complete the Pokedex in that game. Granted, you had to shell out a lot of cash to buy all those different games. I recognize that, but at least that it was possible on a code-based level. But and for Sword and Shield, like that is the first one where literally you cannot even bring some Pokemon, hundreds of Pokemon, into the game. And that's one thing, but the thing that really got to me at the time and still kind of pisses me off to this day about that is the excuse that they gave, which was, well, we can't get all the Pokemon in because we're really working on these high quality animations. And it's like, are you kidding me? High quality animations? If you go back and look at Pokemon Coliseum or even Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64, those animations are on another level of what they delivered decades later on the Switch with Pokemon Sword and Shield. It is an absolutely embarrassment that they use that as an excuse. Anyway, I'm kind of getting on a tangent here about why I didn't like Pokemon Sword and Shield. Point is, Sun and Moon was released between bad releases in the series, and I do think that helps to a degree of why I think it is so strong. But I think like even in a vacuum, I think Pokemon Sun and Moon are the best games of the series. They were the first Pokemon games I introduced to my wife Reagan. She agreed that no Pokemon game that we've played since has even come close to Sun and Moon. And uh there's a lot of reasons for that. There's so many things that it does better than any other game in the series. And the thing that stands out to me the most when I think about why Sun and Moon is so good is, believe it or not, the characters and storytelling of Pokemon Sun and Moon. I was so shocked by the quality of the writing and the characters and the storytelling in Pokemon Sun and Moon coming off of X and One, which is just a zero in that category. Uh, to where I just couldn't believe it. Like every time like a twist would happen or a character development would happen in Pokemon Sun and Moon, I was just kind of left speechless because I could not believe that they were actually putting this in a Pokemon game coming off of the, in my opinion, narrative disaster that was Pokemon X and Y. And as a result of that, I was so hyped for Sword and Shield, and they went back to like the X and Wild style of having like no story at all. Where I was like, wow, I guess that was just an anomaly. That was really impressive. The region itself of Sun and Moon, exploring the four different islands that were obviously extremely Hawaiian based, and they really nailed that atmosphere and aesthetic of Hawaii in Sun and Moon. I thought they absolutely did it absolutely brilliantly. The new Pokemon that they created in Sun and Moon, especially with the Hawaiian theme, were incredible. Some of my favorite Pokemon to this day are Gen 7 Pokemon like Lycanroc and Decidueye and geez, I can't remember. My Pokemon names are getting rusty in my old age, but Mudsdale, the ground horse, all like freaking bangers, like some of my favorite Pokemon of all time. And then on top of the new Pokemon that they created, they did a Lowland Forms. It was the first one where they did a regional variant of a Pokemon that existed previously, and they did so many absolute bangers with Kanto Pokemon, which I already consider the Kanto one original 151 to be by far the best lineup of Pokemon of any of the games in the series. But you do like freaking fairy ice Ninetales? Are you kidding me? Or a fire ghost Marowak that's like a freaking fire dancer, a Hawaiian fire dancer. That's incredible. Or even just like the ice Sand Slash. It's like, man, look, what an awesome idea. Just ideas that you never would have dreamed possible before Sun and Moon. Another thing about Sun and Moon that the big gimmick with it was the Z moves. And I think some people didn't really care for the Z moves compared to Mega Evolution, and I'm just like, man, I just strongly disagree with that because what was so cool about Z moves was that all of your Pokemon could utilize those, and so it was something that you didn't have to sort of, if it was something you wanted to take advantage of, you didn't have to like cater your team around it, where you were just picking from, couple few dozen Pokemon that could take advantage of it, like it was with Mega Evolution. All Pokemon could utilize the Z moves, and so I thought that was a really good idea, really strong idea. It's my favorite of the sort of you know uh, post Gen 6 gimmicks that they've come up with in the series. And then I've got to give a special shout out to Team Skull. I mean, Team Skull are just beautiful people. Like I'm not. All the Pokemon games have their teams, and starting with Team Rocket, obviously, and going through the water and the fire guys, and then you had your Galactics and whatever else. And to me, you know, I think that they did Team Rocket pretty well in that first game, where they were like truly like this imposing threat that were like legitimately really kind of tough to take down with how challenging the level scaling was in that game. And so like I thought they were intimidating and they did a good job in that first game. But then, you know, other than that, like the teams have all mostly been a joke. I guess like the dichotomy between Team Aqua and Team Magma was fairly cool in Gen 3, but um, Team Skull, I mean, every single time they are on screen, it is just an utter delight. They are played as complete jokes from literally the first scene that they are introduced. It's like so self-aware, and as a result of that, it is just so funny every time. All of their like every scene that they're in, I'm just like so excited because it is just like peak comedy to me. And I guess like for some people that just didn't land, but for me, boy, I thought that it was so funny. And then like it felt like they were kind of trying to copy that almost in Sword and Shield with Team Yell or whatever those stupid idiots were. And it just fell so flat to me. So yeah, that was another aspect of the game that I really enjoyed. Honestly, I enjoyed everything about it. Like the environment, like I said, was just so impressive, especially compared to the X and Y that came before it. Like it was like so on another level. Like I remember exploring those islands and just having so much fun doing that. They were so like atmospheric and aesthetically strong and varied between the different islands, and like that was just like super satisfying. Mentioned the storytelling, I think is my actually my favorite aspect of the game, which I never would dream that I would say about a Pokemon game. The new cast of Pokemon was fantastic. The Alolan forms of the Pokemon was fantastic. Every Pokemon was able to take advantage of the special mechanic that was the sort of the gimmick in the game with the Z moves. Team Skull is like on another level, and then of course they had the kind of interesting idea of not doing the traditional gyms but having like the island challenge instead, and I thought that that was really cool. Like it was a fun way of sort of mixing up the formula a little bit, and I enjoyed all those, and I thought they were a lot more memorable, frankly, than a lot of the gyms are in a lot of the Pokemon games. So for all those reasons and more, I just think Pokemon Sun and Moon is just so far and away the best game in the series. This is somebody coming from someone that played the series from the beginning, Gen 1er, Gen 2, Gen 3. I played all of them up through Sword and Shield. Now, honestly, I haven't really moved on past then. I haven't played Scarlet and Violet, seeing what a disgrace those were. And I couldn't really get into Arceus, and I have no interest whatsoever in this Legends ZA crap or whatever else they're getting ready to come out. So I will admit I am a jaded Pokemon fan, but a lot of that is because I thought Pokemon Sun and Moon was so strong, and then the quality bar for the series dropped off so fast after that. It was like it gave me whiplash, and so for all that, taking all that context into consideration, all the things that I think Pokemon Sun and Moon did unbelievably well, I think they're the best games in the series. No one says that. And so for that reason, it's number two on my underappreciated video game list. And that just leaves my number one most underappreciated video game of all time. And if you know me well, it probably won't come as a big surprise if you listen to my top 25 video games. This game did extremely well. If you looked at my most beautiful video games, this game did extremely well. It excels in every category under the sun, other than gameplay, which I know for a lot of people is really important, and I think a big part of the barrier to entry for this game. But my number one most underappreciated video game is To the Moon by Ken R. Gao. This is a very short 3 to 4 hour experience. It was a made in RPG Maker by one main developer, Ken R. Gao. He released it on Steam in 2011, but it was remade for the Switch in 2020, which is how I first heard about it. And I still, every time I talk about this game, I've got to give thanks to Ben Reeves at Game Informer for reviewing this game, because if he hadn't done that, I probably never would have heard about it. And I just remember looking at that review in 2020, seeing the trailer and thinking, this looks like it could be the greatest game ever made. I don't quite put it as the greatest game ever made, but it's currently, if you're curious, it's number six on my list of the greatest games of all time. But what sets To the Moon apart from all the other games that are in my top 25, like your Final Fantasy VII, your Bloodborne, your Kingdom Hearts, your Final Fantasy IX, Last of Us Part Two, these are all games that are super well known, games that whether you like them or you don't, whatever, but you certainly heard about them. But To the Moon, I think, is on the level of those games in so many different categories. And you never hear about To the Moon because it's a game that just the vast majority of people have never played, and in many cases never even heard about. And so I will evangelize for this game every chance I get, and that's why I'm putting it here at the number one most underappreciated game. But what does it do extremely well? Like I mentioned, the gameplay, not super strong. In fact, there is very little gameplay. It's to the degree where this game could work as a book or a film almost as well as it works as a game. The only real gameplay that you have is moving your character around, obviously, and it's like a top-down JRPG perspective, so there's no problem with that. And then there are some like light puzzles in the game. There's some puzzle solving that you have to do, but I wouldn't call it a puzzle game or anything. It's mostly just kind of used as a plot device to move things along. But for people that are like looking for a high action experience, or they want to have the gameplay excel in some particular way, To the Moon is not going to do that for you. But on the flip side of that, it's extremely approachable to the point where anybody can play To the Moon. Anybody, as long as you can read, can play To the Moon. And I think that you should. If you're listening to this right now, you should play To the Moon. It is available on all major, anything that you can play a video game on, basically, you can get it. So you have no excuse. And then also, it's only for 3 to 4 hours, like I said, so it's not even a huge time commitment. So what does the game do extremely well? Basically everything other than the gameplay. The storytelling is it's one of the greatest stories that I've ever experienced in any medium, video game or else. Some of the all-time greatest characters, obviously, that go along with that. The two main characters in particular, it is a psychological, just tour de force of what it accomplishes with those two main leads, and it is absolutely unbelievable. I guess I can tell you the premise it has a little bit of a Psychonauts premise where this guy is on his deathbed and he hires this company, these two scientists to come in, and they go into his brain basically, and they try to help him accomplish something that he always wanted to accomplish in his life but was never able to accomplish, and in this case it is going to the moon. So in order to do that, they have to like dive into his psyche and figure out why he wants to go to the moon. And the problem is he doesn't understand why he wants to go to the moon because there's some stuff going on in his history and in his psychology that he's unaware of. And so they have to dive in there and like figure all that out. And there are so many twists and turns. It is just so incredibly well done, so amazingly heartfelt. I cannot make it through this game. I've played it multiple times without coming to tears. I often can't even hear the sort of like the main track of the game called um, "Everything's All Right." Without going coming into tears, honestly, like even if I'm not playing the game, like I, literally in a vacuum, if I hear that song, I will often be driven to tears. It was the song that my wife and I chose to have played for our first dance at our wedding. It is on that level of quality, but also just the rest of the soundtrack that is not does not have vocal performance behind it. That is just instrumental and mostly piano. Is like so unbelievably well done. I cannot believe that one guy was able that made the game was also able to do that. I mean, just an unbelievable talent to be able to put all these things together, to the likes of which I don't think that really anybody that I've ever seen would be able to put all those disparate things together into one product himself. I guess you could put Matthias Linda up there, but it's not like he was the composer for that game, you know. So just an unbelievable talent. Ken Argal deserves the utmost respect and accolades for what he has accomplished. But the thing that obviously is hanging over to the moon is the fact that nobody ever talks about it, and it's a game that is so easily missed. So few know about it, and so that's why I consider it the number one underappreciated game of all time because I think it should be revered in the same breath as those classics that I mentioned earlier, your Final Fantasy VII and the Nines and The Witcher 3 and the Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Last of Us Part 2, all that. Kingdom Hearts, Bloodborne, and it's obviously not. And so for that reason, I think it is the most underappreciated video game. I think probably of all time. Certainly the ones that I've played. Goes without saying, this list is based off of just games that I've played. But I think that I would be shocked if there was a game that I have coming for me in the remainder of my life that is going to be as underappreciated as To the Moon relative to the quality bar of the game itself. And so for that reason, To the Moon, my number one most underappreciated game of all time. I implore you to play it if you are listening to this podcast right now. But that is it for my ranking of the most underappreciated video games that I've ever played. If you've played any of these and enjoyed them, or if by some miracle you listen to this and you are convinced to play any of these games and enjoy them, then I hope that you will appreciate what awareness I was able to bring to them and enjoy listening to me kind of kiss their asses for the last couple of hours. If you go back and listen to the first episode in conjunction with this one, so we're leaving that one behind now. Despite my kind of lack of gumption with the podcast lately, there's still plenty to come from Controlled Burns in the weeks ahead, including the continuation of my greatest music series, Game of Thrones, Andor, Disney Villainous with my wife Reagan, and so much more. It's also getting about time for me to make my NFL predictions with my cousin Brett. That is going to be coming back for year two, and I'm thinking if I go back and let me look when I did that previously. Um, I think we did that around the end of October, maybe. Uh, Let me see here. Oh no, we did it actually at the end of November. It was where it was posted. I kind of want to do it earlier this time because it was a little bit easier, maybe a little bit too easy to make the predictions like we did in that time frame. So maybe I'll kind of go toward the end of this month, maybe around like week 8, week 10 of the NFL maybe is where we'll start making our predictions. So I'll have to coordinate with Brett on that one. But look forward to that if you're an NFL fan. And then I guess the last thing that I want to say here, it is October 3rd, 2025, currently as I record this, and October 2nd, 2024 was when I posted my first episode of Controlled Burn. So it is officially, we are past the year mark here on the podcast. And if to anybody that's listened to any of these episodes and enjoyed it, or, obviously I've had a number of different guests that have come on the podcast. Thank you to all of those people. I've really enjoyed the experience. We're not a big podcast. We're not setting the world on fire by any means with what we're creating here. But I have enjoyed the conversations. I've enjoyed the experience, the excuse to come on here and talk about some of the things that I really enjoyed over the course of my time, and of course some of the things that I haven't enjoyed as much with some of my discussions with Reagan over the Last of Us Part 2 season 2, I'm sorry, of the show. But yeah, I've really enjoyed that, particularly whenever I get a guest on here, like having Reagan on, or having, reconnecting with my friend Wesley to talk about the roller coasters, or having, Brett come on to do the NFL predictions, or my brother Brandon to come on and talk about his top 25 video games. And there's still plenty of guests that I can have come on, like Brett, or my other cousin Lauren, or my stepbrother, that could come on and still do their top 25. So that's certainly a possibility for the future as well. But for everybody who's listened, everybody who's tuned in, everybody who has joined me on the podcast, thank you for your time and for giving me the chance to either talk to you or talk at you about some of my favorite things. So if you're interested in anything that's coming down the pike, or you have any suggestions or things that you'd like to see on the podcast, remember you can write into the show at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. And then if you like the show, you can subscribe, follow, like, or review wherever you listen to your podcast. But for now, and until next time, keep it warm.